Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for sticking around. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel discussion. First of all, I'd like to welcome our panelists and introduce them. First of all, we have Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, who serves as the 30th Sheriff of Harris County, one of the largest sheriff's office in the state, and he has for the past 6 years, so thank you for being here. We have the Honorable Ann Johnson, who serves as a state representative for Texas House District 134, which encompasses our Texas Medical Center. Thank you for being here. We also have the Honorable Kim Ogg, who serves as the district attorney for Harris County since 2016. Thank you for being here as well. And at the end, we have the Honorable Senator John Whitmire, who serves as our Texas State Senator in the 15th Senatorial District, encompassing the North Houston and Harris County, and has been in service for over 35 years. So, to frame up this, I want to thank everyone here for their participation in this wonderful conference, and we've had such a full day of presentations in both research and programs around firearm injury prevention. But before we get started, it's important to know your audience. So as a show of hands, if you feel comfortable, raise your hand, panelists included, if you are a firearm owner. Raise your hand. If you own a firearm, okay? And for the audience, so that our panelists can kind of know who they're speaking to, who here is in the healthcare industry? A lot of healthcare. Awesome. And then who here is in firearm injury prevention research? Injury prevention research in general. Excellent. About half of the room there. And what about in law enforcement or criminal justice? Oh, excellent. Excellent. So we have a nice, diverse audience here for our panelists. All right, so this first question is for all of our panelist members. We're going to start with the elephant in the room, Uvalde. The deadliest school shooting that Texas has seen occurred as the school year was ending and at the time when children were just getting back to normal with the stressors of the pandemic. Houston ISD has 276 schools with over 190,000 students. As Texas leaders, what are the one or two things that you feel are essential to continue or implement to ensure the trust of our parents in the safety of our schools? I'm going to ask DA Ogg to weigh in first.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I think the three things that Houstonians and all Texans want to know when we send our children to school is what is their safety plan, what is their safety protocol with the agencies who would respond, and what training have they had. I think if we can answer those three questions, it will give our resident parents greater comfort level just in knowing that we are at least prepared. I don't know that we'll ever be ready for a mass shooting, but we would at least be prepared.
Sheriff Gonzalez?
Thank you. Just to add to what District Attorney Ogg stated, and I'm a product of the Houston Independent School District, so to me, as a parent, as a member of this community, making sure that our schools are safe is a top priority for myself and many other police leaders. We're very fortunate here that we work very collaboratively. There's a lot of resources in Greater Harris County, and while Houston Independent School District may be the largest, we also work very collaboratively with all the number of ISDs that are out there and some of the smaller charter schools as well that may not have all the police resources handy. So it's something that we're going to continue to do. We spoke about it today. Internally, we have a meeting tomorrow. We're scheduling a lot more updated tabletops as well. Obviously, as the response in Uvalde is being reviewed and dissected as well it should be, there's lessons to be learned there as well. You know, we when Santa Fe occurred, the shooting here in Santa Fe, I remember responding that day myself, even from Harris County, going over there. It's like an all hands on deck approach. I was there on the ground as all the deployment was being rolled out. And so obviously got a firsthand view of that response there. And there's always something to learn from each response. So we're always learning, again, internally from lessons learned that we may have had here, as well as learning from others and across the country. And sadly, there's been far too many examples in this country from Columbine on to now. And so we just want to make sure that we're prepared, because we've got to take some serious action, because it's not a matter of if, it's going to be when it happens again, because the way, without action, it's going to happen again.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you very much. I think the biggest thing for us is to recognize it's June 21st and we're still not in a special session. So I think you ought to ask the question, are we tired of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? We can't keep asking law enforcement to solve a problem that they can't respond to reactively, and we need to be proactive. So when you look at mass shooters, there is a commonality among them. And we have had 5 of 10 of the greatest mass shootings in this state in the Abbott administration. And so I don't want to hear the same thing we heard after Santa Fe and El Paso and Sutherland Springs and Midland, Odessa. I would like to hear legislature come back. And it is time to do the thing he did not have the courage to do the last time, which is extreme risk protection orders. We need to give law enforcement the opportunity to prevent things proactively. Now, of course, I'm going to step up and I'm going to vote for whatever we need to do that can keep kids and schools safe. But expecting them to defend against something that we don't politically have the courage to do something about, to prevent, I think is asking the wrong question.
And Senator Whitmire.
Thank you. And thank the sponsors for bringing us together. We need more conversations like this, but we've got to leave here with a mission plan. We've got to leave here fired up and quit talking to each other. The legislative committee is meeting as we talk. And they're not talking about the solutions that most of us would propose. I could give you a laundry list of things that I believe would help, but to narrow it down to the most important 2 would be red flag legislation, and then a mental health system that would respond to the documentation that someone's having a psychological, emotional challenge. It works in other states. There's nothing to fear from it. It's a due process procedure that protects everyone's Second Amendment. But the commonality in these shooters are they're having a mental health issue. So if we can detect it early and then have a mental health system, let's speak about the mental health system for a moment. In this city today, if you have a minor or an adult, but I deal with minors quite often, that have not committed a crime, they can't get in the criminal justice system to get what little help you get there, where do you go? You go to the emergency room? We don't have Medicaid expansion. We could put that on the list of to do. So this is not rocket science stuff. The leadership knows the solutions. The members of the legislature know the solutions, or partial solutions, certainly first steps, and they refuse to acknowledge it. So I will close with this. Until everyone in this room and the people we know, our families and friends, make this issue the single issue of how you're going to determine how you vote in November, then we're not going to get to where we need to be. You know who's at fault. You should know who your state rep and state senator is. And if they're wrong on this issue, inflation, other issues that are so important, like women's health care, you've got to set other issues aside as you grade people's paper. And society, Texans have to decide enough's enough on gun violence, and we're going to do something about it. And it's not just the mass shootings. We daily are losing, as the sheriff will attest, 3 or 4 folks each night in the evening news that DA Ogg deals with. So you add the 3 or 4 violence on the streets of Houston as it relates to guns and suicides. We're having literally mass shootings each week in the city of Houston and Harris County. So thank you, but we got to leave here fired up.
I couldn't agree more. We have to leave here fired up. And that is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring people together, was to see what we could do collaboratively as a group. Now, one of the things that leads me into for Representative Johnson and Senator Whitmire is, since you alluded to what we can do, is what experiences have you faced in trying to pass legislation to promote firearm safety, and what lessons did you learn from that experience?
Well, I've had Moms Demanding Action have asked me to sponsor their legislation the last 2 sessions for red flag legislation. I can't get a hearing. The Lieutenant Governor will not refer it to a committee. So a moment ago I said elections matter. This fall we have a statewide election at every level. So take notes, know your representative, your senator, have them talk to the leadership. But here's a real frustration. They witness the pain and the tragedies that we do, and they use diversions. They want to talk about hardening a school. Professionals will tell you by the time a mass shooter gets to the school, it's too late. If they can't get in the one door that Senator U.S. Cruz wants to establish, they'll do shootings in the parking lot. If you want to do metal detectors, as the Lieutenant Governor proposed after Santa Fe, that creates a line at the front door of the school, so they would have access to those vulnerable people. So the bottom line is, as I said a moment ago, you know, we could talk about raising age. That's a major step. Large magazines, we could talk about that. But I really think if we don't have a red flag where one of you or an emergency room doctor says someone in the emergency room is going to leave there and they're emotionally disturbed and they're going to take it out on domestic abuse victims or whatever altercation they anticipate, you've got to stop them and deal with their being armed at that time. And then you've got to have the mental health services.
So I'm proud to be a gun sense elected official, which means in my first legislative session, I advocated not only for common sense gun safety reforms, but fought vehemently against permitless carry, fought vehemently against long weapons having the right to be in a hotel even if a business didn't want it, fought vehemently against silencers made in Texas so they can avoid federal regulation, fought vehemently against another bill, which is if you happen to be a business and you don't want to provide money to people that manufacture ammunition, well, now you can no longer get a state contract. So when Governor Abbott says he wants to make this a Second Amendment sanctuary city, I will say, as what most reasonable gun owners would say, the Second Amendment has been twisted by some individuals to mean something that it is not. And so these illogical policies in Texas have put us into a position to have weapons everywhere. One of the bills that we offered was an anti-mass shooter bill. So if somebody walked in this room right now and fired off 10 shots and were just not a good enough shot to kill one of us, but hit 10 of us, they could be prosecuted as a second-degree felony, maximum 2 to 20 years, and not stackable. To me, that's nuts. And so I offered legislation to make that a first-degree felony stackable offense. And so we've seen after that bill failed that it would have applied to a number of people who were just failed mass shooters. But I think that the law ought to treat them as seriously as they are. That died in the Senate at the feet of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick because the gun owners of America objected to it. A resolution that I had to honor the death of a child who was killed by a gun in a high school here, and just a resolution to honor his life. Not a law, not anything that would have any effect other than to put in Texas history the story of this child, the manner in which he died, and the last phrase, that his life won't be in vain, and we as a state of Texas will take firearm safety measures seriously. Firearm safety measures seriously. The Republicans on the Homeland Committee could not pass that resolution because that phrase offended the gun lobby. So when you say, what have we tried to do? We've tried to do everything that you've asked us to do. But there is a group within the legislature that are beholden to a group of folks that walk around with guns on their hips and shirts that say compromise and death. So they are more rabid than you can imagine. And so until our feeling of urgency politically to make this the #1 issue that either gets you to Austin or out of it, you're not going to change it. And so if they won't change the laws, change the people who are there making the laws.
Thank you so much. I do want to acknowledge that for this panel, we did invite several of our Republican leaders to be here with us today. They are also working in the Texas legislature during the hearings today as well. So, so just want to make sure that we're being full in our disclosures as well. You'll also see in your programs today that Chief Finner was to be joining us, and he unfortunately had to make a last-minute cancellation, so we do miss his presence today. Moving forward, I do have questions for Sheriff Gonzalez and DA Ogg. With COVID, we saw a significant increase in pediatric firearm injury, and in our local hospitals at the Texas Medical Center, these injuries were up by as much as between 30 and 65%, predominantly from assault or homicide. Hospital-based violence intervention programs can be helpful in preventing further injury in these affected patients, however, only after the initial event. We want to work upstream to stop the crime from happening. In light of the changing landscape from the pandemic, what priority programs would you like to invest in and to collaborate with to reduce firearm-related street violence? DA Ogg, I'll let you go, or Sheriff Gonzalez.
Well, I go to many of those scenes, and I've seen our children injured, not killed, and it's tragic and it's awful. And I've been in this profession now for many years, and I'll tell you that it's so much more common now to go out to some type of a violent scene, and you see or hear of 30, 40, 100 shots being fired here in an urban setting. I remember in Acres Homes, just recently, about a month ago, going out to a scene, and almost 100 shots were fired. One of the bullets went into an apartment and struck a young child. Luckily, he survived. But, we hear and see those stories too often here in an urban setting, and that's just bad. And so I think there's a desperate need for sensible gun laws to be in place. I think it's reasonable. I think we should be smart and thoughtful, look at the data. I see Lupe here with the Harris County Public Health Office. We're working much more closely together at the county level now to try to see how we could look at this in a multidisciplinary way. And so I commend all the different health practitioners and others that are here, because I think we have to look at this from beyond just law enforcement, look at it here, in a variety of different disciplines, and having all hands on deck and seeing how we could develop thoughtful policy, looking at violence interruption programs, other interventions that we could do up front. I see, we have the possibility of working with the City of Houston with gang intervention programs as well. I see my good friend Victor Gonzalez with the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office, looking and seeing how we could best collaborate and strengthen some of those programs early on, try to intervene, seeing what could be done to educate families and raise awareness, trying to make sure they're keeping their weapons stored and safe and away from the hands of children. And so it's just, again, a multi-pronged approach that's needed. So it's looking at what else could be done there, making sure we're looking at all stakeholders that are in the community, that are in the space, that are doing work to try to, seeing how we could reduce gun violence in our community. So I participated in in Mayor Turner's gun violence prevention committee that he had. I'm glad to see we're going to be up and running again to seeing what else we could do and what other recommendations we could do.
Thanks. I had to get my thoughts together. There are so many things that we need to combat firearm violence. So at the District Attorney's Office, I have full appreciation of prevention programs and of research required to help us advance in the long term. The problem is the job of the district attorney is what's happening now. It's who's in front of us charged with a specific crime where there's generally a victim if it involved firearm violence. So what we need is accountability now at the courthouse. I think there's a feeling in our community that there's not going to be accountability, at least for a long time, and that this sense of complacency is fuel for young people making impulsive decisions and for professional criminals. And where those two groups come together, are in gangs. And so we have three primary drivers of violence in Harris County right now. Domestic, at least in homicide, is domestic violence homicide, gang homicides or gang-related homicides, and professional criminals, repeat violent offenders, often out on bail for long periods of time. There's a backlog at the courthouse. The backlog drives the length of time that people are out on bail. The time that people are out on bail often provides an expanding number of opportunities, not just to get into trouble, but to continue on with violence if they're gang bangers or if they're involved in organized crime, more robberies for profit, that kind of thing. So you have a domino effect. And what would I fix? I would fix the courthouse. That's what I would invest in. 6 years without a place to try cases is irresponsible in terms of our county funding. That would change. 2, I think we need to focus, just like Senator Whitmire said, if you want to change something in Austin, we've got to prioritize. That's the same here. Government works best when we're all focused on one thing at the same time. So to focus on violence, we're also going to have some changes, I think, in our gun laws. So I would support and invest my time and credibility in helping these legislators advance some very simple Second Amendment consistent policies and laws. One, people under 21 do not need to be able to buy an assault rifle ever. They have to wait till they're 21 to buy liquor. So we really need that law changed. Yes, we need red flag laws. I will tell you very quickly, it took over 30 years to get, and it took me becoming DA, to get the mental health system and the criminal justice system records in a compatible format where we could look at each other's records so that we could divert mentally ill, low-level offenders. Likewise, we need to be able to spot high-risk, mentally ill people who may not be offenders yet. So we're going to have to expand somehow the records of our mental health treatment and individuals who've received it, and non-criminal records, hospital and school records. We need somebody to, I think, understand those systems and be able to just answer the red flags. I mean, none of this last shooter, his nickname where he worked was school shooter. I read that. I don't have personal knowledge of that, but I mean, there's a red flag. And not even the type that we're talking about, but clearly somebody who had not socialized well at school, who was not well accepted where he worked. That's what his friends and peers called him, or his coworkers. So I think there's got to be a way to at least see those real pointy heads when they stick up and take note of them and get that person some kind of proactive treatment. And the last set of laws that I would ask for or invest my time and credibility with would be anything that would stop these the sale of these large magazines that carry 50, rounds, and the switch that is used to transform a Glock pistol into an automatic weapon. So there's different things to invest in. And at the DA's office, we believe in prevention. I believe it needs to be invested on, but we need help now for the things that are driving our crime rate. So we need help in domestic violence, gang violence, and repeat violent offenders on bail too long with too much time in between to stay in trouble.
That was so eloquently put, absolutely, as far as the laws that we need right now in order to help improve things. One of the laws that you alluded to was raising purchase age to 21, and that kind of leads me into kind of knowing where your stance is, DA Ogg, but having the rest of the panel weigh in, as well as kind of looking at it from a broader perspective. There's this saying that I learned, I'm not a Texan in full disclosure, I'm a Midwesterner, so I learned this phrase when I moved to Texas, that as Texas goes, so does the nation. It really kind of spoke to me. And we saw this example in policy too with Tobacco 21. Texas passed Tobacco 21, and then the whole nation went Tobacco 21. And so where can Texas lead policy change? And in Texas, you have to be 21 to purchase a handgun, right? So is it time, and is the climate right now for Texas to raise the purchase age to 21 for certain types of long guns? And what would the implication be to the nation if Texas took the lead on this? And can Texas take the lead in the climate, especially given the situation we have now? So I'm going to pose this to the rest of the panel, as well as if DAOG has other comments on this question.
Well, as Representative Johnson said a moment ago, we have to be in session before we can take up items. And yesterday, the Democratic caucus in the Senate, we asked the governor to bring us into special session. Just for the simple, as a talking point, I made a point yesterday that the public, you, are entitled to know where your state rep and state senators stand on these reasonable gun proposals. And quite often, it's been my experience, even if you have a losing vote, it's valuable to see where people stand. And as I mentioned a moment ago, they won't even talk about red flag laws. They won't talk about raising the age. If we were in session, we could propose legislation and at least take it to them and have a debate. And we should be the leaders in the nation. Unfortunately, we're not. We're not even followers at this point. Florida has a red flag bill, and other states are using it very effectively. It just really gets back to holding people accountable. And while we're talking about holding people accountable, I'm of the opinion locally you cannot continue to allow people that use a weapon in an armed robbery to then get another bond. And it's unheard of, as long as I've been working in the legislature on criminal justice, to hear that someone will get a second bond, but to get up in 5, 6, and 7 bonds is just irresponsible. So the bond system needs to be closely restructured. The judges have to be told, in my judgment, zero tolerance if someone uses a weapon in the commission of a crime. Well, I mean, we ought to just, that ought to be the first principle that people are asked when they run for office, certainly at the Harris County Courthouse. Our district attorney is underfunded. The office needs additional resources. The backlog is a serious matter. And to hear that the building's not adequate is just, we've heard that play too long. Houston has night court for its traffic. Houston could have Saturday courts, whatever it takes to hold someone accountable. And as I've said, if you use a weapon, and the mayor's doing his best, others are doing their best, our law enforcement, but the message ought to be zero tolerance when you pick up a weapon and go put it in someone's face. The only difference in an armed robber and a murderer or a capital murder is they don't pull the trigger. So once you decide to put a gun in someone's face as an armed robber, you have crossed the line of, quite frankly, redemption in my books. We've just got to let people know that they will be held accountable for an armed robbery, because we're seeing repeat offenses by the same individuals. And it's just, we can pass as many laws as we'd like, and we need to focus on prevention and treatment. But on the other hand, once you've been arrested, and it's very hurting the morale of our sheriff and our police departments. They're beginning to see the same actors repeatedly, and that's why you and I quite often don't feel safe.
So I absolutely agree with raising the age. If anybody has a question, I absolutely will go to 21. I'll give you a little silver lining, which is when permitless carry was passed in the House, somebody actually offered an amendment to drop it down to 18, and that was rejected bipartisanly. So I think that gives you some hope. I would also say that should be a signal to the governor: call us back, let us come in, and let us raise the age to 21. Because I think if you did that, you'd reduce about 25% of the mass shootings. To me, that's a statistically significant number. And so I would hope that he would call us back, let us vote on this issue, and let us pass it, and let the nation recognize that that is the right thing to do. I'm glad to hear both DA Ogg and Senator Whitmire bring up the backlog, because I know our friend Sheriff Gonzalez a couple weeks ago said the jail is full. And so I want you to know something. Where are you going to put these folks? And so I don't want to blame him on the back end, and I want to recognize part of the problem of the backlog. I've been down in that system for 20 years. We've been needing new judges and new courts for decades. And for decades, we haven't been getting them. And so I'm proud to tell you that on October 12th of this last year, Commissioners Court unanimously, bipartisan, unanimously, means all the Republicans and all the Democrats voted to fund 3 new criminal district courts. I offered a bill, and almost all of the Harris County delegation, Republicans and Democrats, said, Governor Abbott, please give us a chance to vote on this bill, because if we pass this bill and add 3 new courts, we can get out of this backlog in 2.5 years. But if we don't pass this bill and we don't add these courts, you guys are not going to get out of this backlog for 15 years. And so part of my frustration is, are we at a spot where we want to complain about the crime issue, or are we at a spot where we want to solve it? And so you had an overwhelmingly bipartisan, statistically proven way to make you safer today. And unfortunately, the governor was not interested in doing it. So my promise to you is I will continue to advocate for sound public policy that will make you safer. And to start with, given what we're talking about, background checks, extreme risk protection orders, safe storage, raising the age to 21 are a no-brainer. Even our local ministers put an article in the paper, I think a couple days ago, overwhelmingly saying this is an issue of which demands we all come together. And so I look forward to your leading the way on all of us coming together for some of these sound solutions that would actually make a difference.
Absolutely. I support raising the age to 21. To me, it's a no-brainer. It shouldn't be complicated. In my mind, it should be done, and I hope it's given strong consideration. I strongly support it.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and this is specific to DA Ogg and Sheriff Gonzalez. Texas is one of the states that has passed child access prevention laws. However, it is only for those who are under 17 and if they have access to firearm that is readily dischargeable. However, they're not uniformly enforced in all regions. What are some ways that you believe a cap law can be utilized or enforced effectively within our counties? And do we need to make any changes to the state policy in order to allow improved enforcements of those?
Sheriff, you mind if I start? Okay, on this one, I got this one. You know, I keep waiting for the same problem to cross my desk. In 5.5 years so far, not the same. I'm just waiting for one where I got this one. I know the answer to this. So this negligent access to firearms. Quick education. It used to not be against the law. City of Houston, in about 1994, passed a city ordinance that made negligent access a ticket, a $200 fine. That's the most they could do. It might have had a higher fine, but it was a Class C offense. That was big news. I remember asking somebody, does the mayor know this is happening? Because we were, because gun control was a hotly debated issue even in '94. And so they did that, and then shortly after, the state legislature passed legislation to make negligent access to firearms by a minor as committed by an adult a jailable crime. And now it's at least a felony, but for some time, probably 20 years or so, it was a misdemeanor. So you can see how we dipped our toe in the water and saw how it went. So here's what's happened. It's not consistently enforced. This is what I noticed my first several years. I'd see a child that the sheriff or the police chief, somebody had been shot by usually another minor, or they'd shot themselves. It's very traumatic for officers to see that, investigate that, and of course it's traumatic for the family whose child is both injured, and the family, if it's another family, who who was negligent about the placement of their firearm. And so because there's so many emotions and so much trauma involved, the legislature has this 7-day waiting period now before we charge. But it's difficult to enforce a law against a parent whose child was just killed. And yet that's what these laws do. So why would we punish a parent whose child dies or is seriously injured because of their own negligence? Well, first of all, we make it easy for them to not break the law. So the sheriff, the district attorney's office, the police department all gives away gun locks. They're so simple. You just run them through the barrel of the gun, it can't be fired. Lock it up. They're free. So we made it easier. We also told people about these laws, and there was a long period of time where they knew about them. What our office did that was different is I sent a letter to all 86 law enforcement agencies in Harris County, and I told them it would be required of our office that they bring every single case involving a child killed through potential negligence access by an adult, that they bring every single case to the DA's office, because here's what had been happening. Some cases were brought. It was often against a less, an accused person who was maybe not very responsible, had left the gun on the sofa, or was maybe had a criminal record. But cases where you had maybe a nicer house, or parents who were professional, but they'd been negligent, sometimes those cases didn't get brought to the DA's office. And so immediately what you begin to see is racial disparity, economic disparity, and a real need for uniformity in policy. So now we take every one of those cases to a grand jury, and law enforcement's been instructed by our office to bring all of those cases. We don't have that statewide, Representative and Senator, and we could use a requirement, I think, that means that police will not abandon their discretion about what they think, but that they will bring those cases to the district attorney, and the district attorney's office then would have the responsibility of determining whether to bring charges or not. And what we do is we present them to the grand jury, who's made up of community members, and you decide whether they're indicted or not. And that's how we handle every negligent access to firearm case. I realize that took a lot of time, but it takes a minute to explain. And the answer is easy. We need consistency.
Can't go after that, but I'll just say that I do appreciate the district attorney, her leadership and her team. I do remember that directive a couple years back requesting that all cases be brought to for review, and I thought that was a very positive step. We had one recently, a 4-year-old that gained access to his uncle's pistol that was left unattended, and he shot and killed himself. And you're right about the 7-day provision. But again, I think, and you've also been very instrumental in raising awareness in the community about safe storage and the billboards and things like that. And I think we joined you recently for another initiative that you had. And I think it's about raising awareness. And you said consistency as well, that unfortunately, as painful as it is, that's why people need to heed the warning ahead of time and secure their weapons. If they're going to be a gun owner, be a responsible gun owner, because this is 100% preventable, and we've got to make sure that gun owners are responsible, and when they're not, then unfortunately we have to hold them accountable. It's painful, but we have to advocate for that child that lost his or her life by no fault of their own, and we have to continue to raise awareness.
As a point of clarification or even a follow-up, what about for the children that are injured but not necessarily lives lost? Are they still prosecuted or brought up in the similar manner?
Yes. Yes, it's not a policy based in result. It's really designed to prevent this. And so we just have law enforcement bring all their cases.
Excellent. So this question is geared towards Senator Whitmire and Representative Johnson. We've talked a little bit about mass shootings already, but I don't know if the audience is aware, but just to make the audience aware as well. Among the top 10 deadliest mass shootings in America since 1949, Texas makes the list 5 times. El Paso in 2019, Luby's in 1991, Sutherland Springs in 2017, the UT Tower in 1966, and now Uvalde in 2022. Here at the TMC, we have the largest medical center in the world, and with some of the best and brightest research minds in the state and country who might contribute to solving this problem. However, funding for research around firearm injury prevention is sparse, as we've learned, and we need research to develop these and test evidence-based solutions to drive policy. We see signs that bipartisan progress on legislative solutions is possible at the federal level. How do we get to a point where Texas funds firearm injury prevention research at robust levels?
I like how you push that and kick that over to me. I don't know that we can do it in the current climate, and I'll give you an example of that. Last session in the House, there was a bill that wanted to look at the impact of the fiscal challenges of us funding things like SNAP and TANF, benefits for kids on welfare and food. My fear for that is that in a couple years they'll come back and say, look, here's some fat we can trim off these programs and stop giving food assistance to children. So I looked at that bill and I said, oh, if we want to look at social services and determinants of health, why don't we study the data on having failed to implement Medicaid expansion and look at that and figure out if there's some fat we missed on that one. That got put up for a vote, and it was rejected on almost purely partisan grounds. There were Republicans that voted for it and said, yeah, let's look at the data. And I asked a friend of mine, I said, what's the harm in getting the data? And his response was, I think we all know what it's going to show. So I feel the same about this. At the moment that you have a political figure saying that we will be a Second Amendment sanctuary state, and we need to buy more guns than California, and you have people that walk around the Capitol with guns on their hips and shirts on their body coming into our hearings to say, if you compromise, death. I don't think you're going to get those entities to vote for data or vote for funding on getting data. And so I would also say, I don't know that we need the data. The most recent results that come out will tell you the leading cause of death in children are guns. And so I think we're going to have to be in a position of counting on you all and counting on independent research to tell us what we probably already know. I would not expect the folks that can't even have rational conversations around guns to give you the data that you need to prove your point.
If you don't remember anything I say, if you don't remember anything but this, nothing happens in the legislature by accident. It's all by intent. So when you write the budget, there's a priority list. And this is just not one of the priorities of the leadership and the majority of the members that control both houses. Of course, they'll say, well, we are short of money, and it didn't make the list. This year we have money. We're going to have billions of dollars of extra revenue this year because of the price of oil. So this year, their excuse that we just don't have enough money for our critical needs and this is a new expense is just false. So what I would like to spend a minute on is where do we go from here? Because I think we've done a real good job of documenting the problem, and we're talking to a very intelligent group of folks that follow current events. What we have to do is each of you have to know who your state rep and state senator is. I used to at luncheons or meetings, I would start over here and say, let's start over here and tell me your state rep and state senator. And it so embarrassed people, I stopped doing it. And I won't do it today. But if you don't have a working relationship with your senator and your rep, if you do not make yourself accessible to candidate forums this fall, we're really not doing our job, because we really are repeating ourselves. And while we're sitting here talking, there's probably a disturbed person in the state or in our community making some really evil plans, the copycats that we so are concerned about. So it's not not science. It's not rocket science. It's very simple. We know the problem we're dealing with. We actually have reasonable proposals to solve it. Now we've got to get your elected officials, our colleagues, to act. And the governor doesn't think he needs to. I think, quite frankly, after Uvalde, that first day or two, and it's really sad. I've seen video clips of his rhetoric after Santa Fe, after Sutherland Springs. He really has talking points that he continues to reuse, and he'll reuse in the future. So, as I said earlier, until we make this the issue that you judge your elected officials by, we're going to continue to live in fear. And I've got 6- and 8-year-old grandsons, and I know their mother, my daughter, is afraid to drop them off at school, even summer camp. And we just can't live in that environment. I know with the repeat violence on the street in the county due to guns, we're all beginning to work our schedule where we're not so vulnerable. So, you know, we just have to live like that. We have to hold people accountable that use a gun. We've got to do prevention. And getting back to that funding mechanism, mental health. I actually had the mayor of Stephenville. He was in town last weekend visiting his children, and he wanted to talk to me about home care. He runs a home care vendor providing service. He told me that what he's paying his home care providers, his staff, it ranks 49th in the nation. And he said he told me the Central Texas state rep that he talked to, can we get additional money? I think they're paying the state $10 an hour for nurses assistants. And the state rep said, how do we become 50th in the state? We have some really callous, backward state reps and senators. And it starts at the top. We have money. We need to make social services, mental health a priority. And I know it would be reflected in some of these tragedies that we witnessed, the family abuse, domestic abuse became a real priority a few years ago. We passed meaningful legislation after study groups, and it's making a difference. So we just got to look in our toolbox, raise the age, gun magazines, mental health, the red flag. But we've identified the issues. Now let's do something about it. So I would urge each of you to leave here fired up, talk to your families, your neighbors, and it's amazing. We all run for office. It's amazing what one person can make a difference in a campaign. And you need to be that one person and partner with others.
Thank you so much.
I just want to just say something real quick. Also at the federal level, I know for decades there was a freeze on funding for gun violence research at the CDC, and I think their budget had billions of dollars, was only about $100,000 to do research on these issues. So I think, I don't know if it's loosened up any here in the last few years, but that's real important as well. We should be looking at the data about this at all levels and really making informed, data-driven decisions here. And it's difficult when we don't have the data to really guide some of our decisions.
But we have our common sense. We have our common sense. I've seen enough studies in Harris County, just of my office, that would have funded the 100 prosecutors that I asked for. We don't need any more studies, in my opinion. Yes, research, because data is critical. But, you know, I'm frustrated with lack of action that's meaningful at a county level. And until we make some pretty dramatic changes, fix our courthouse, improve our bail system and record, get people to trial speedier. I mean, there are innocent people also waiting. It's not just victims waiting. Everybody has a right to get their case tried, and they're either going to be acquitted or convicted. And so that's what we need. To do that, we need people. So that's all I want to say about data is really important, but we need boots on the ground right now. Bodies are dropping.
And I can't sit here with this information without sharing it with you. And I've spent a career, I've been chairing criminal justice since '93, and the state system works well. We know what we're going to do with you. So I say that I haven't built a career of locking people up. I totally believe in treatment, second chances, alcohol, drugs, mental health. Most of the women in prison don't belong there. They need to be in the community. Many of them are victims themselves. But I do believe, back to my earlier comments, if you put a gun in somebody's face, you ought to be held accountable. The jail is full because people are not being processed, and most of them are violent offenders. Before COVID, TDCJ had 147,000 inmates. 147,000. Today it's 117,000. It's because the courts are not working and holding people accountable. The numbers are continuing to drop. Harris County furnishes the system about a fourth of its clients. The major cities provide the overwhelming number. But as long as people are going to be holding folks up, murdering them, and then getting back on the streets of Houston, Harris County, we're going to live in a dangerous environment. And so while I'm very passionate about nonviolent offenders, work with them, keep them in the community, DWI perpetrators ought to be given every opportunity to go to be sober, because if they're sober, they're not a danger to you. But when someone puts a gun in your face and shoots someone, that person needs to be held accountable. And it's documented, and the data would show no one's being held accountable because they're being backed up in the Harris County Jail. And don't forget, we had, Sheriff, about 500 Harris County defendants in Louisiana. So that number is continuing to grow. We must move those that law enforcement arrests through the court system. There's some innocent people being held down there as well. They deserve their day in court. But it's just very frustrating that I go home this evening and we'll watch TV, and there's going to be numerous murders. And the worst thing we can do is become desensitized to the violence that we're seeing in our community. It's hurting our quality of life. I think it's hurting Houston's image, and for sure it's going to ultimately affect our economic development. I already have talked to the chamber. People that they're attempting to recruit to Houston, Harris County businesses are talking about our crime rate. So we've got a work cut out for us. The subject you brought us together today, we've identified proposals that could solve that. Now that's going to be a political solution as much as anything. So we got to leave here saying we're not going to take it any longer. So let me just thank you for bringing this together. It kind of gets me fired up leaving here today myself.
I think all of us are fired up after today, for sure. And I think it speaks to us needing to hold each other accountable, hold our policymakers accountable as well, but also to hold each other up, right? Because this is, for those of us who've been in the game of firearm injury prevention, it's sometimes our long, dark days. And we need to continue to remind ourselves that while the days sometimes are long and arduous, at the end of it, we're about saving lives and working to impact lives, right? And every life is important for us to impact. And so we must continue on, because, we'll get there. I mean, we will absolutely get there. And that's what we need to do. So in looking at the time, I want to make sure that I give our panelists each an opportunity to make a final comment, and then we will close out our very amazing day filled with so much energy and enthusiasm. So any final comments from anyone else?
I appreciate you getting me at Rice. This is probably the closest I've ever been to being a student at Rice. Based on GPA and SAT scores.
I just want to thank the Baker Institute of public policy, and everyone that attended today for this very important conversation. To me, there's not just one thing that we need to be doing. It's going to be a multi-pronged approach. I like to try to compartmentalize things and understand that, look, we've got to do something about suicide prevention. Extreme risk protection orders may not necessarily, all the data isn't there to determine if they would make an impact necessarily on mass shootings, for example, but we know that they would have an impact on suicides, for example, and the data is there because 19 other states already have them. So we could learn from those states, see what's working, what's not working, and make sure that we're improving it here in Texas. We also need to look at intimate partner violence. That's very prevalent and growing tremendously. There's a strong nexus between some of the homicides that we see and domestic violence. We also need to look at, obviously, mass shootings, as well as just the day-to-day gun violence that we're seeing on a regular basis. Each is going to require a different type of approach. And also another area that's forgotten, the average length of stay right now in the Harris County Jail is over 200 days of incarceration, where the state average is around 60 days. So it tells you how backed up we are here, that is just clogging up the system. And so it's not a very safe situation for even our personnel that are inside. The offenders inside are becoming much more violent. And so we've got to do something about that. But every year here in our community, we have 90,000 children that have a parent that's incarcerated in our jail. And when we talk about juvenile crime, we've got to make sure that we start that intervention early to disrupt that trauma that's going to exist for those children that have a parent that's in our jail. That's 90,000 children every year. They're going to underperform in school. They're probably going to drop out. Many of them are going to become just as involved at some point. The statistics bear that out. So I think when you asked earlier, one of your first questions is, what can we be doing? That's another area that we often don't touch on, but I think it's important because we're going to see the impact, and we're seeing it now. I was getting briefed today on a robbery crew, a violent robbery crew that's going around with weapons, as the senator said, and one of the members of that crew is 14 years old that was arrested. 14 years old, already committing armed robberies with other adults. That's something that should send chills to all of us, because when kids are armed at 14-year-old committing robberies, okay, that's we could see where that's headed, and our jails are going to continue to be full, and we're going to continue to talk about gun violence unless we make serious changes to laws, as well as making sure we're looking at the interventions like mental health at our schools and all the other pieces together. So thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I almost thought you said lawn dart days rather than long dark days. But don't forget the lawn dart. The lawn dart in the 80s killed 4 kids and we banned it. Seriously. The lawn dart. 4 children died, and one of their fathers took on the mission of going to Congress and highlighting the fact that this thing was dangerous for children, and they banned it. Now, I'm not saying ban guns. I believe in the Second Amendment. I noticed when you asked who has a gun, I'm the only one up here that didn't raise my hand. And I think we had a rifle growing up, and my father taught us to respect it, that it was dangerous, and that it was a place where we didn't play with as a kid. And I've also been told, being around law enforcement for 20 years, that don't have a gun unless you're ready to fire it and kill somebody. And personally, I don't know that I could do that, right? But I respect the fact that there are other people that want to do it. I will also tell you that when I talk to people and we talk about permitless carry, average citizens are shocked when you tell them that Texas passed a law that anybody can walk into a place and buy a gun without having to pass a background check in certain places and zero training on even how to put the bullets in the gun. And people are shocked. They don't know that happened. And so I would ask, as Senator Whitmire and I both have demonstrated in promoting legislation that supports common sense gun safety reform, court backlog, mass shooter, and even the bond issue. He and I both have taken on that issue, and I think both of us have promised to continue to take it on. What frustrates me is I always hear the media talk about cases, and I just wonder what would happen if every day they talked about the number of cases get filed in Harris County that involve a gun. What if the focus every day became about how many crimes were being committed with a gun? And so I don't want to see us get deflected by message from the overwhelming reality that our crime problem is in part a significant issue with Texas letting anybody and everybody find a way to get a gun. And I just think for those of you that respect, and I know all these folks with the badges on do respect the Second Amendment, we have more in common And we have more that we know that we could do if we could get the political will to do it.
Okay, I'll close it out. Murder is nonpartisan. Guns are nonpartisan, and the Second Amendment was written for all Americans. I have a lot of gratitude for the people that I'm sitting with. We're local. We understand our city and our county and our state. We understand the role that guns have played in our history, all of that. And I just think it's common sense that research is good. I didn't mean to say it wasn't. Research is good, but we need to use our common sense. I think I can run these numbers each day, Representative Johnson, about exactly how many people were charged with crimes of violence or possession, illegal possession of a weapon. And for it to be illegal, you have to have it while you're committing another crime. So you're in possession of some type of drug and you're carrying a weapon. That now creates an illegal way of, or a set of elements for carrying a weapon. Otherwise, you can carry them just about anywhere, anytime you want. So I have a lot of confidence that with the type of educated and experienced legislators that you've got, that they will work with their counterparts on a non-partisan way to attack and reduce gun violence. And I think we just have to keep working with both sides. I like the idea of telling how many each day are involve guns. Good idea, Representative Johnson, and maybe that's something we publish every day. McDonald's tells you how many they've served. So maybe by putting it in people's consciousness, it would help. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take a look at that and see if we can't make that public. And finally, I just want to close out and thank the sheriff and his deputies do a great job. They are also understaffed and sometimes outgunned, and they do a great job. And Sheriff, I want to thank you. I would say the same about Chief Finner. These are men that I've known all my careers, and you are in good hands here. So I'm going to urge us all to be super grateful to the Baker Institute, to you, Dr. McKay, of course, to you, Doctor, and for all of you for coming. If any of you can get to any one legislator, just have a conversation, another DA, people who can vote or influence this issue directly, it's worth your time. That is exactly how the law changes. It is really one person at a time. So each one of you have the potential to make the same difference that we do. Take your experience, leave here fired up, and together, Houston can change this. We have a history of pulling together to solve problems. Thank you.
I'll just quickly conclude by saying we don't have to live like this. And we're all public servants. Everyone I'm looking at, whether you're ever on the ballot or not, you're a public servant. So we need to leave here and do our public service to change this policy. And I do believe that we will be successful. It's just unfortunately going to take a little longer than it should because we got some folks that are afraid to stand up to special interests. But we can be that special interest that balances the NRA and other irresponsible groups. So thank you for having us. This has been very helpful, and let's leave here as game changers. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Be fired up.